One of the black men, Lafayette Mason, he was a grantee, one of the few grantees who wasn't from New York City, wasn't from the Capital District, but actually grew up here in the North Country in Clinton County.
Yes.
And had a farm in New Russia, received land from Gerrit Smith, stayed on his farm in New Russia though, and made a living as a farmer with crops and cows and chickens and maple syrup and was I guess you could say he was successful as a farmer.
He was, and at the same time I want to say I don't think Gerrit Smith's gift to him of land he never used went unused just because he didn't move to it. He had a better thing going where he was. But with this deed, he probably had the capacity that tipped him into the category that was able to vote. And he did vote. And in 1860, when the, I think there's another constitutional convention where again the idea of black voting rights is revisited, comes up on the ballot all over New York, he votes in favor of black rights. And it doesn't win, it doesn't prevail, but he puts his gift land to work in that way, and that's thrilling. And probably when he moves, he sells that gift land, I'm guessing, and is able to put that money to work again for him to help him move.
And he actually bought more farmland from Gerrit Smith, 350 acres. But before he could successfully farm that land, along came the Civil War.
The Civil War comes and it upends all his plans, and he decides to serve. He gets a hefty bounty for doing so, which undoubtedly goes to his family to preserve the farm and keep it going. But he has a terrible war. He serves in a white regiment because he's light complected. He's accepted by his local company and in the 118th Regiment, the Adirondack Regiment. And he comes back, his physician will say, a skeleton, a physical wreck of his former self. So obviously he's in no shape to farm, or at least to farm quickly. And unfortunately he's fallen way behind on what he owes Gerrit Smith to pay for the land he's been buying on shares, on time. And Smith decides it's time to take it away from him because 10 years have passed. Smith's only gotten the one installment. And Smith believes a bargain is a bargain. And this part of the bargain he hasn't been gratified by. So he takes it back and sells it to a relative, and suddenly Lafayette is out of his farm. Yeah.
You write in the book, the abolitionists who had given a black pioneer free land in the name of political empowerment and economic freedom bowed to the spectacular landlord who yanked a farm contract from a war-disabled, late-paying veteran and father of 14 and sold it to a white, long-distance city buyer with no intent to settle. And from Gerrit Smith's perspective, this made sense.
It did. He was very hardcore about contracts. He was a businessman. That's why he made such a big deal of his gifting. He never lent money either, and he's constantly approached for loans, but he would only give because he knew there was a good chance he wouldn't get paid back on a loan, and he didn't want to be tussling with people who were needy. He wanted to just give outright if he was able to. He'd given Lafayette Mason land outright, and then he'd also gifted him. The gift he never troubles with. That's Lafayette Mason's business. The contracted land is a different story.
So Mason lost that land.
Sure did.
He and his family move out to Iowa first and then to North Dakota, where they were given land in North Dakota because he was a Civil War veteran.
That was by the federal government, though, not Gerrit Smith.
Right, 160 acres to farm in North Dakota, and that's where he lives out his life.
Yes, and he doesn't live long there before he dies, but boy, he's productive. He gets so many fruit trees into production. He clears land like crazy, mostly working with his wife, I think, who stays on as far as her health permits before she has to move away. I think it's a hopeful story of his character, of his resilience, and above all, of his commitment to an agrarian life. And at the beginning you asked if voting rights was Gerrit Smith's chief aim, and I think I said it's a double aim, and I never explained the second part. Gerrit Smith is also an agrarian, and he has a fervent belief in the power of farming to make citizens of people, white and black, and restore them to their sense of their worth, their capacity, their effort, and their due reward. And he thinks farming is the way out of city life and the way out of poverty and the best escape from racism. And boy, I think Gerrit Smith's hunch was kind of right, and I think Lafayette Mason vindicates it and sticks with it long after Gerrit Smith is on to other things. Lafayette Mason is still bearing the torch of the agrarian. He's holding the agrarian standard high all the way to Iowa and all the way to the Dakota territory.
The Dakotas.
Yeah.
Kurt Steger with Paul Smith's College says if you map out all the lots, there was a time when more than half the land in the towns of Franklin and North Elba was black owned.
Well, I agree with that. It was black deeded, and
Okay.
I would simply qualify it that
Difference,
way.
black deeded and...
It is kind of, because if you don't register your land with the county clerks, it's not clear if you're an owner or
Okay.
not. If you're deeded the land, you're deeded the land. But if it's not registered and you haven't taken that next step to let them know you've been deeded the land,
Yeah.
it's a little problematic. But even then, it's a phenomenal piece of news. And all credit to Smith, to Kurt, for doping that out on the map.
Last summer, the summer of 2023, you joined with a group of educators and activists, community members, all gathering to celebrate the unveiling of historical markers, roadside signs, honoring the legacy of African American settlers and showcasing the communities in Franklin and Essex counties. And in one particular case, righting a wrong and renaming a brook that had long had a racist name in honor of John Thomas, an African American who escaped from slavery to move to the Adirondacks, where he became a successful farmer and a respected citizen
Yes.
in the community, in Loon Lake and in Vermontville.
And we know this because he writes a thank you letter to Gerrit Smith, a long letter saying, let me tell you about myself. These are my beginnings. This is what I lost. This is what happened to me when I was enslaved. My wife was sold away. I lost my 2 children. I was devastated, and I could see no reason not to give escaping a chance, a try. And I made it to Troy, and I met Henry Highland Garnett, the great charismatic minister I spoke of, and I moved to Franklin County. Okay, the land you gave me didn't quite work out, but I found a better lot, which was true for almost all the grantee settlers. And I've farmed it with great success. I now have money enough to have savings. My wife and grandchildren are around me, and I couldn't be more thankful. And I know how much you've done for my people. I'd like you to know what I've done with your gift. It's an interesting letter because he's not only thanking Gerrit Smith, he's making sure Smith knows he's had his trajectory of labor, work, suffering, and effort too, and that he's not just meeting Gerrit Smith with his story on the Adirondack frontier, he's letting Smith know the backstory that leads to his being on that frontier and how much that cost him, how much he did along the way to get to that point. And I think that's quite significant. Unfortunately, he doesn't hear from Gerrit Smith, but Smith keeps the letter, which is how we get to read it.
And that letter from John Thomas to Gerrit Smith, you found that at Special Collections at SUNY Plattsburgh. So did a local historian, Don Papson, and you may have actually been looking around the same time you both discovered
Absolutely.
that letter.
Yeah. We both were, unbeknownst to each other, digging into the abolitionist files at the Special Collections at Plattsburgh U, and both discovered the letter from John Thomas to Gerrit Smith and were elated at the discovery of evidence, finally, from one of the black recipients of land, of their own experience in their own words. And it was such a joy to find something that came from somebody who actually participated in it, who had been on the land and had experienced it and told his backstory. And Don wrote a lovely piece about that, several of them, for local newspapers, and I was working on it for my book.
And you found that letter, and that letter is part of the documentary Adirondacks for All that
Yes.
has come out within the past year. The folks at the Adirondack Experience, Eric Reardon and filmmaker Paul Frederick, telling that story and including a lot of what you have found and how that the history of the Adirondacks, there's more to it than a lot of people maybe have heard.
And what's more thrilling to me is, what's as thrilling to me, is that the story is gaining traction. With each telling, it seems as if people in the Adirondack region are embracing it more and claiming it more for themselves and saying, this is my history too. Whether I'm white or black, I own this Adirondack history and take pride in it. And evidence of that, for me, is the turnout at these various events for these historic signs. When we put up the first one at Timbuktu, with the rough idea of where we think Timbuktu might have been, there were maybe, I don't know, 30 folks who turned out. I was thrilled. We were all thrilled that there were that many. Next time a sign went up at Blacksville, near Loon Lake, there were maybe 75 folks who turned out. That astonished me because publicity had not been great. And then when the sign went up for John Thomas Brooke, replacing this racist name of a century's duration on the map, I think 150 people were there or so. So word spreads and pride grows and ownership of the story expands. And what's happening in the Adirondacks, I think, is happening all over the North as people claim these lost histories and are celebrating them and bringing them to light. It's a thrill.
And many community members, many people gathering at those unveilings. Organizations are now working to make the Adirondacks more inclusive. And a lot of people are working toward that goal now.
That's really a striking change from 10 years ago when I started this research project in the first place.
You started back in the 90s, early 2000s. You curated the Dreaming of Timbuktu, John Brown Farm.
It's still there.
John Brown lives and
still going strong.
Got you going. And I think you said at the time that, well, I found some information, but not a lot. I have enough for a short pamphlet of maybe 50 pages or something.
Well, originally I said there's no story at all. I've read the antiquarian history. I know this is a nothing story. Nobody came. That was the rap. And the head of John Brown Lives, Martha Swan, said, keep going, see what you find. Then the political backdrop revealed itself to me, and then the deeper involvement of the black grantees, the land agents who helped out so much. And one thing led to the next, and it became a much more expansive story than I understood. So yeah, we went from exhibit to hope of a pamphlet to a book that's pretty thick.
It is a lot of notes in the back, but it is a great read, a great history. The Blackwoods, pursuing racial justice on the Adirondack frontier. Amy Godine, thank you so much for being with us. Folks, of course, can buy this at local bookstores here in Plattsburgh and in the North Country and enjoy the read. Thank you so much for coming in and being with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you.